The program today is called Business as Usual, or not. And I just want to say that we're all very proud of Perry, whether it's business as usual or not. Perry has been described as the crossroads of Georgia, and it is, because you see right out here, under this red light, is where two national highways cross, US 341 and 41. So we are truly the crossroads of Georgia. We have been described as a city on a hill, and we are. Take a drive in either direction and the land goes down. In 1919, we were called the Peach Town, and we were because there were more peaches grown in Houston County than in any other area of the state in 1919, and Perry is the town center. Come in. The Georgia Gazetteer of 1860 referred to Perry as a large town. Can you imagine that? And then in 1874, the Houston Home Journal had this to say about us. Perry, the capital of Houston County, referred to as a capital, did you catch that? Is a flourishing place situated on Big Indian Creek, and it's the geographical center of the county. It has handsome public buildings and communication by railroad with all the cities of the state. Well-conducted schools are located here. There are over 30 business establishments representing an annual business of over $1 million. 10 lawyers, 5 physicians, and 1 newspaper. I think then, as now, the lawyers outweigh the doctors, 2 to 1. Well, whatever we choose to call our town, we must all agree that it has lots of history, and it is a lovely place to live and to raise our families. So let us begin this discussion today with just a few structural oddities located along Carroll Street. And this is Carroll Street that runs this way. Well, we know that in 1891, Dr. L.A. Felder had an ice house in a tunnel underneath his drugstore because the Houston Home Journal advertised that. That is just below where I'm standing. Just recently, Dan Bellamy, who owns the business right across the street, Bellamy Jewelers, told me that David Overton, the last owner, had made him aware of an open well that is beneath the front corner of his business. Now we know that that business was built in 1872. So now we know that that open well beneath that business dates back to before the 1870s. And it's important to know that there's an open well there if you have to crawl up under that building for plumbing or electrical or whatever. When the courthouse over here was built in 1956, it was a time when America and Russia were engaged in a Cold War. Fear was on everybody's mind. So guess what they did? They built a bomb shelter in the basement of the courthouse. And there were other businesses along this street that included basements in their buildings. They were all built after the 1920s, and one of them was built in the 1940s. And I think part of that could have been because of the fear, but it was more likely that for the first time, appropriate digging equipment was available to make more space for storage or whatever the need was. Down the street, before you reach the next red light on the right, is Perry's first baby clinic. Now that was built in 1945. There was no hospital in Perry, so the babies had been born at home. And now there was a public place where they could be, where they could be born. So Dr. Gallimore is the one who built that building, and he posted the pictures of all those babies in the lobby area of that baby clinic, and there were thousands of them, or hundreds, or something like that. one last piece of information. There were 2 Masonic lodges that were located in the downtown area of Perry. And this dates back to the late 1800s and around the turn of the century. We know one of them is located right down here because it's still marked as such. The other one was located behind Rusty's Beer Garden. That's what I call the restaurant area on the outside. Well, going back to a little history, a little government of the town, Perry was incorporated in 1824. And before it was incorporated, there were people who lived here. The county was incorporated in 1821, so we had 3 years there that we needed a form of government. That form of government was the inferior court of Houston County. They had limited jurisdiction, and they had procedure over any of the affairs of the town. And they are the ones who ordered that lot number 49 in the 10th Land District is the place where the county courthouse will be built. And that said place will be called Wattsville. Well, in 1824, the town was incorporated, and there was a board of 5 elected commissioners who governed the town. They were given authority to appoint a town marshal. They had superintendents over the streets, none of which were paved. Prohibit or remove all obstructions or encroachments or nuisances, and to levy and collect taxes. So they're the group that passed such laws as this. Town leaders shall have the power to take up and impound any horses, mules, dogs, hogs, sows, or other cattle running at large in the town. So if you wonder when animal control got its start, now you know. Said marshal or deputy marshal shall have the full power and authority to call to his aid any and all of the white male citizens of said town capable of bearing arms for the arrest and apprehension of any offenders against the laws of this state or the ordinances of said town. So they created, or they had the power to create, a town militia. No policeman. Any person who shall fasten a horse, mule, or ox to any tree or box around a tree or to any fence shall be fined 50 cents. No person shall build, have, or keep a privy within 4 feet of any public street under a penalty of $1 for each day said nuisance shall continue after the notice. No person shall throw into the streets any rotten fruit or vegetable, dead carcasses, or other matter, in such quantities as to become offensive. And one more, no person shall build a fire in the streets of the town, nor camp therein, under a penalty of $5. But blacksmiths may build fires in front of their shops. Well, when Perry was designated as a city in 1908, the governing structure changed. For one thing, we had a mayor for the first time. We elected Mr. C.E. Brunson as our first mayor, and now, well over 100 years later, Jimmy Faircloth is serving as our 19th mayor. Well, regardless of the leadership, whether it's commissioners or inferior court or whatever, people are the same. So business as usual, there was theft in the town. We know that in 1883, Mr. C.A. Thompson had a bale of cotton stolen from his gin house, and he has not caught up with the thief yet. So if you see anybody running around with a bale of cotton, stop them, please, and ask them if it came from Mr. Thompson's warehouse. We also know that in 1897, Mr. Day, whose store was right down here, had a new Westminster bicycle stolen from his window. It is known that the thief was committed after 12 o'clock, and it's also known that the thief went at least 4 miles out on the Hawkinsville Road. The wheel was all that the thief wanted, as several pairs of fine shoes in the same show window were unmolested. The tires of the bicycle were not inflated while in the window, and the fact that the thief stopped in an alley to inflate them gave the clue as to the direction he went. The track of the wheel is different from others in town, and therefore could be easily identified. And there was evidence that the thief is not an expert rider. It is believed he will be captured, as he was followed early Tuesday morning. The glass through which he broke was 4 1/2 by 5 feet. Isn't that an interesting way to write up a theft? Well, there were other articles that were written. This time, the people of Perry are described not so usual. We have an article in 1909 that talks about the people of the town this way. But the men, what of them? They are gentlemanly, polite, entertaining, and some of them are good looking, but none of them beautiful. But of the 800 people in the town, there are 18 maidens over 30 years of age. There are 28 widowers, 11 widows, 11 widowers, and 12 old bachelors over the age of 30. But the people seem to be the happiest. They seem to have all they want, and they never worry about anything. They take life just as it comes, contented with their lot. What a delightful state of affairs. Couldn't that be said in 2016, Perry, Georgia? Business as usual. Well, in 1891, Mr. Fred M. Culler was the tallest man in Houston County, and he lived in Perry. Why, he was 6 feet 6 inches tall at 21 years of age. And then there was a young lady in Perry who loved music. Listen to how she was described. One day, several weeks ago, 2 farmers were in a buggy driving a mule through the streets of Perry. When directly in front of a certain residence, their attention was attracted by a noise that issued from the house. The driver stopped the mule, and for a moment the men listened intently. Then by vigorous action, the mule was induced to go forward, and the driver exclaimed, "My God, I thought she was hurt." The farmers had discovered that the young lady of the house was singing an operatic air with piano accompaniment. A young man was passing by. He reported the occurrence to his father, and thence came our information. So now you know how media get their information. Well, there was one gentleman that felt it his duty to populate the town. You already know about the 800 who lived here. Bob Brooks was married 3 times, had 42 children, over 100 grandchildren, and over 140 great-grandchildren. So a lot of that 800 came from the same family. Well, how was business in Perry? Well, some of it was business as usual. We know that in 1868, Mr. Bateman finished digging up his sweet potatoes, and they averaged 4 pounds to the potato, and the largest of them weighed 11.5 pounds. That was one big sweet potato. In 1884, Judge Holtzclaw, who owned this building, grew a 2-story turnip. I don't know if you've ever seen a 2-story turnip, but what happens is 2 perfectly formed turnips grow on top of each other, and then they're joined together. Well, in 1885, we had another medicine introduced from Perry, Georgia. Now, we're all familiar with the SSS tonic, but that goes back to the 1850s. But in 1885, another one was introduced. This was Ginn's Pioneer Blood Renewer. And it was first made in Perry using an ordinary iron pot for boiling. It would cure rheumatism, mercurial poison, scrofulous affections, glandular swellings, skin diseases, sores of all kinds, blood poison, and female complaints. Well, before this afternoon, I checked Amazon. I thought that female complaints thing just might be worth checking out. They've taken it off the market. Well, in 1893, there was one merchant in Perry who was interviewed by the Atlanta Constitution because he sold a variety of Georgia-made goods. In fact, his store contained 29 different items manufactured in Georgia. These items consisted of 2 kinds of cotton cloth, hose and half hose, knitting cotton, shoes, brooms, curry combs, etc., all the way down to oysters, candy, crackers, and soda. Well, 9 of these items were made in Houston County, and 4 of them were made in Perry. See, I tell you, it's business as usual. Bill Loudermilk thought the Georgia Artisan Center was a very creative idea and something new. Back in 1893, one of the merchants of Perry had already done that. Nothing new under the sun, Solomon said. Well, in 1912, furniture could be bought from Sims Furniture Company. You could buy plows, buggies, harness, and wagons from B.H. Andrew down at the hardware store. Mr. Starbuck and Mr. McDonald offered automobile repairing, supplies, gas engine repairing, electrical contracting, and steam and gas fitting. I find that very, very interesting, since the first automobile agency really didn't start in Perry until 1917. However, you could buy one in Hawkinsville or you could buy one in Macon. So just because we didn't have an automobile agency here in 1912, that didn't mean that cars were not here, because they were bought elsewhere. Mr. Coons offered fish and oysters when they were in season. The rest of the time, he just offered country produce. John Jackson, the barber, gave you a haircut for 25 cents, shaves for 15, or shines for 5. The farmer's warehouse sold mules, fertilizers, wagons, and heavy groceries. Don't you just love it, the way they just mix things all up? It's like Walmart 100 years ago. One could stay at the Perry Hotel for $2 a night. Dr. Cater, whose drugstore was just right across the street here, sold soda water, paints, and stationery. Mr. Bloodworth would buy your chickens and eggs and field peas and cotton baskets and sweet potatoes, and then he'd turn around and sell you groceries and hardware and stoves and crockery and farmer supplies. The Perry Meat Palace offered fresh beef, pork, and sausage, and a stock of fancy and family groceries. Don't know what the difference is. Mr. Hauser offered dry goods, shoes, clothing, hardware, plows, and harness. And if you got sick, Dr. Barr, who was a physician and a surgeon, was over at the Perry Hotel. Or if you needed your watch or whatever repaired, you could go see Mr. Rainey, who was at the Perry Loan and Savings Bank. Or you could visit Mr. Nunn, an attorney at law, down at the Masonic building. So, we didn't have such specialization as we have these days. Well, one thing I found that does prove that business is as usual was back in 1918, Mrs. King had gathered ripe olives from her yard this fall, the first that has ever been raised in this section. They are a brownish red color, and they were pronounced by the olive experts as being a nice size and a most excellent flavor and quality. Now, we don't know who the olive experts are, but we do know that Mrs. F.M. King lived down where Watson Hunt Funeral Home is located. So olives grew down there in 1918. What was Christmas like in Perry? Not so usual as we know it. We know that in 1897, we know all about that Christmas. It lasted about a week. There was a masquerade party that was held on Christmas Eve over at the courthouse. Santa Claus came to visit every home that year, and he found 2 Christmas trees. There was one at the home of Mr. Norwood, and there was the one at the home of Mr. Fred Hauser. Christmas Day, which was on a Saturday, was an ugly day with rain falling continuously, and there were very few people on the streets and in the stores. So we know that the stores were open on Christmas Day. The Monday night after Christmas, there were several bonfires. There was one on the Methodist Church Square, and there were 2 small ones in the rear of the residence of Mr. Hodges. The fire on the square was the great attraction. A huge pile of boxes and barrels made a fire that brightened an immense area, the paper said. When that died out, the boys secured another wagon load of boxes and barrels, and again the bonfire assumed great proportions. Fireworks were plentiful, and the enjoyment was immense and boisterous until about 9 o'clock. Well, what about sports in Perry? We know that in 1883, Perry's baseball team was known as the Perry Stars. And we know that their rival were the Hawkinsville Haymakers. We know that in 1919, Perry had its first big league player, George Benjamin Wynn. He began playing for the Boston Red Sox. His nickname was Breezy. We know that the events after dark were not always or were business as usual. Listen to this one. In 1828, on the evening of the general election, John Barr fell from a window in the 2nd story of the courthouse in a state of intoxication, and yes, he was badly hurt. In 1865, 2 of John Murrell's men stole Miss Colson's pair of beautiful roan carriage horses. Now that was over in Hayneville, but that's all right. They got chased through Perry. 13 miles they were chased before both of the horses and one of the men were caught at Bay Creek between Perry and Fort Valley, and they hung him right there. He was hung just above the ford. The other man escaped, was never heard of again. He knew not to come back to Perry, Georgia. The John Murrell organization was the best organized band of thieves in the United States. And to think, that they came through here. It was a regular chain from Florida to Kansas. And the Bay Creek is over on Valley Drive, in case you're wondering. Well, I'm going to end the storytelling today with something that Maxine Thompson wrote. She called it Colorful People in Colorful Places. She said, "We take abundant electricity so much for granted that we're inclined to get really put out when a storm knocks it out temporarily. That can be more than just a nuisance during hot or cold weather when our only source of cooling or heating is gone. But power is usually restored quickly, and it's available 24 hours a day. Some years ago, Alton Rainey, longtime Justice of the Peace in Perry, told a story about his dad, Jim Rainey, who was Perry's first power and water superintendent. And it all happened when Alton was a young boy. Jim Rainey turned the power on each morning and off again at night. Folks still had to keep their kerosene lamps and lanterns handy for the dark night hours. Among other duties, he read the power and water meters. He was in Dr. Holtzclaw's drugstore one day, right in here, when Tom Wellens accused him of reading his meter wrong. "Well now," drawled Jim, "I read it the way I saw it." "Then you sure didn't see it right," Tom replied huffily. "Are you calling me a liar?" Jim demanded. "Yes, I am," Tom replied. My daddy was a little fella, Alton recalled, but that made him so mad that he just hauled off and slapped Tom Wellings, and they really got tangled up in a fight. Along came Perry Police Chief Barney White. He arrested both fighters, took them over to the county courthouse, right over there, for a speedy trial. The judge was C.E. Brunson, who was also the mayor of Perry, clerk of the Houston County Board of Commissioners. Judge Brunson ordered each of the combatants to pay a fine of $5 in cash or spend 10 days in jail. "Can I go get the money from my mama?" Tom asked. "No, you can sit right there and wait for somebody to bring it to you," replied the unsympathetic judge. "Well, I'll just take the 10 days. I need the rest anyhow," Jim said, strolling placidly toward the cells. Suddenly, Tom jumped up. "Wait a minute, Judge," he exclaimed. "If he's locked up for 10 days, what are we going to do for power?" "Uh-oh, hadn't thought about that," Judge Brunson said. "Sentence suspended." So we will end it with something that I'm calling rules for workers in this office. This would have been about the turn of the last century. If you work for me, business as usual. Office employees each day will fill the lamps, clean the chimneys, and trim the wicks. Wash windows once a week. Each clerk will bring in a bucket of water and a scuttle of coal for the day's business. You'll make pen nibs carefully. Now, you may whittle the nibs to your individual taste. Men employees will be given one evening off each week for courting purposes, or 2 evenings off a week if they go regularly to church. After 13 hours of labor in the office, the employee should spend the remaining time in reading the Bible and other good books. And all employees are encouraged to take complete baths with soap at least every week and change underclothing frequently to avoid offending others. Every employee should lay aside from each pay a goodly sum of his earnings for his benefit during his declining years so that he will not become a burden on society. And any employee who smokes Spanish cigars, uses liquor in any form, or frequents pool and public halls, or gets shaved in a barber shop, will give good reason to suspect his worth, intentions, integrity, and honesty. But the employee who has performed his labor faithfully and without fault for 5 years will be given an increase of 5 cents per day in his pay, providing profits from business will permit it. So with that, this is business as usual or not.